Well, I want to get to this last bit because we were just talking there about some of the material reasons that they're getting worked about this stuff. Because as you were noting earlier, there's some really big congressional fights coming up. And most notably, and the first time we had you on the program was actually to talk about this proposal here. Um, but AMLO is trying to do something that I would say is very in line with people who listen to the show at Left Reckoning, something that we talk about a lot, which is like we really need to increase public control over our energy sector. If you're serious about climate change, hell, if you're just serious about how reliant your power system is, having more public buy-in and more public control of these things is really, really crucial. Could you help people understand? We don't have to go granular here, but like if you could help people understand what this constitutional energy reform is?
Sure. What AMLO wants to do is to strengthen the hand of the public sector in Mexican energy, which, because of the reforms of Peña Nieto in 2013, 2014, has been largely privatized. And what they've done is they've created a system where the Public Federal Energy Commission has to buy energy from private companies, right? So it guaranteed profits for them. And then these companies, there's a provision in the law that allows for self-supply. You can self-supply yourself through renewable resources and such. So this is only supposed to be for self-supply. But what happens is giant companies like Spain's Iberdrola or Italy's Enel, whatever else, have abused this privilege to set up a parallel energy network in Mexico, where they create energy and then they sell it through the public grid to private companies like Walmart or Mitsubishi or the OXXO convenience stores, who wind up paying much less per capita in their energy bills than average people, right? It's a gamed system. It's a gamed system where private companies are guaranteed profits and can also set up a parallel energy network, a parallel business using the public infrastructure, right? So what AMLO is saying is we're going to strengthen the Federal Energy Commission so that the Federal Energy Commission has more powers to handle these things, and they buy public sources of energy first. That's first. They buy public energy first. And then whatever other need is there will be bought from private companies, right? So it's not a full nationalization. What he's saying is you buy public sources of energy first, because the way it was set up now was a way to bleed the Federal Energy Commission out. They were supposed to be competing against the same people that they were being forced to subsidize, right? So it was setting up a situation where over time, the Federal Energy Commission was going to be bankrupt, right? Because it wouldn't work. So it's like a slow-mo privatization. So what you get now is a huge campaign against that from Iberdrola, from Enel, and from American interests. The U.S. ambassador Ken Salazar has been practically knocking on AMLO's door every day over the last few weeks. We don't like this. This is not good. Whatever else. And what the most insidious thing about that is they've been greenwashing the hell out of this thing. And basically, they've tried to set up this argument, which is false, that private energy production in Mexico is renewable, and that public energy production in Mexico is dirty and fossil fuel. So these wonderful, magnanimous private companies are actually on the vanguard of the renewable energy revolution in Mexico. And that's false. It's just a falsehood. Private companies do produce some renewable energy, but it's about a tenth. For example, of Iberdrola, it's a tenth of the energy that they produce in the country. 90% of it is natural gas or other fossil fuels. And from the public side, there is a mix of energy. There's hydroelectric, and they're putting in a big solar farm in Sonora and such, right? But the whole debate down here has been to use a greenwashing argument to make it look like private companies are the saviors of renewable energy down here against a public government which wants to turn the clock back to the 70s and go back to a fossil fuel paradise. Like AMLO swims in oil every day because he grew up in Tabasco, right, where there's a lot of oil. And it's very disingenuous. And it's very, very, very disingenuous.
I mean, this is like a very important bit, and I highly suggest people. It's not about what's going on in Mexico per se, but like it's a similar kind of fight. There's a piece in Jackman recently put out by Fred Stafford and Matt Huber, really breaking down some of these dynamics between public and private power, and green energy. Because I'm telling you all this, and I've been very worried about it. That's why I've been covering so much on this program about what the future of this kind of greenwashing is going to look like, for projects of bringing public, power into public control, is to sort of, make it seem like these private corporations are the ones who are actually green, and it's the big dirty public grids and
That's
systems
the
that are so
argument.
nasty, and we need to get rid of them. I mean, in the U.S., there's horrible carve outs to basically make it extremely difficult, for public power, companies to, that are really owned by the state, to be pursuing green energy. But we'd be remiss not to note, the kind of neo-colonial aspect of this too. I mean, you noted Ken Salazar, but also the Spanish government has not been in favor of this. I mean, there's been a pretty big pushback, against AMLO and Mexico doing whatever they want to with their own country, with the power supply there.
Yeah, Ken Salazar actually came out and said a week ago, I don't know where we're headed with the electricity reform. It's like, who's we? But there's no we here, you know? Yeah, I'm not dancing with you, Ken. Who's we? But this is the attitude. This is the attitude.
Mhm.
The Spanish government has said that they will react very strongly against the electricity reform. Salazar and John Kerry, the climate envoy, have been down here twisting AMLO's arm and saying we need to have an American task force to oversee the electricity reform. Right?
Mm.
What? An American task force? All right, let's have a Mexican task force. America's immigration reform debate. Let's set them up and have them write in Congress and see how that goes over. Right? But it's just implicitly understood that the U.S., Spain can say these things, with no pushback by the media, because it's implicitly the implicit idea is, yes, of course, an American task force should be overseeing how the Mexicans handle their own electricity, right? Just this week, an Italian lobbyist was busted in the Mexican Congress, sitting in the seats where the representatives sit with the opposition. And so somebody had to call a point of order in the Congress and said, excuse me, there's an Italian lobbyist sitting in, can he get out of here, please?
Yeah.
Because Italy also has interests here through Enel, the big company Enel. So it's become a huge debate here over the last week. Who the hell are all these lobbyists, and where do they come from? Right? This has been a kind of a delayed debate down here. The U.S. is quite. We're all very familiar with who lobbyists are and what they do, right? But the job of lobbyists back in the PRI days was kind of behind the scenes, right?
Mm-hmm.
The left is in power. All of a sudden, they're coming out of the woodwork, right, and making themselves much more visible.
I mean, it's truly impressive. Kurt has a piece in Jackman, which people should check out, that breaks down a lot of these relationships, called American think tanks are fueling the Mexican. But there's a particular one that I'd be curious if you could sort of talk us through. It's called the Baker Institute,
Oh, yeah.
and its role here.
Well, the Baker Institute, right in your guys' neighborhood there, in Houston, more or less, set up, in honor of James Baker, right, the Secretary of State under Daddy Bush, and who helped Bush steal Florida, right, as his campaign manager. And the Baker Institute was set up in 1993 as supposedly a nonpartisan institute to do research, academic research that's going to be the benefit of the world, right? Interestingly enough, the institute has both an Institute for Energy Studies, right, and a Center for U.S.-Mexico Relations, right? Very interesting that they have both of those, because that for them very much overlaps, because the United States, Mexico is all about getting the energy, right? Opening Mexico to energy, right? So what's interesting about the Baker Institute is the role that it and other think tanks play in U.S.-Mexico relations. One of the big funders of the Institute is a big Mexican magnate called Claudio X Gonzalez, right, who's in the statesman circle of big donors. One of the big fellows is Jesus Reyes Roles, who was the head of Pemex before. And to go through what the Baker Institute does for the Mexico-U.S. Center, it's basically a machine of right-wing propaganda. You just go through event after event after event on their website. You know, AMLO is turning back the clock. AMLO's energy reforms are terrible. Mexico needs to be competitive and give consumers choice in energy. Just like all the talking points. Just all the talking points are there. And they've got an $11 million budget a year to do a lot with these talking points. So what I think we have to analyze from the left is how these think tanks create a tax-deductible space where, in this case, Mexican oligarchs and American academics, lobbyists, business people, graduate students, journalists who agree with them can come together and have all these events and have all these forums and all these connections and all these contacts, take Mexican talking points, translate them into English, and then disseminate them through experts into the US media, and do the same. Take all the crap from the talking points and insert them down into the Mexican media, which is how you get this really strange alignment of talking points a lot of times between the Mexican media and the US. With talking points, with think tanks like Baker, like the Wilson Institute in Washington, and others, to act as intermediaries in all this. That's something that needs to be analyzed, and I think needs a lot more attention paid to.
No, I can't tell you how much I agree with you on that. Like, I wouldn't necessarily consider myself a journalist, but after college, I spent a couple of years sort of, trying to break into that world in DC, and I worked for a couple different English, news sites. I worked for Al Arabiya and things like that. And it was amazing to see, because you had, journalists who, a lot of them were overworked, and they were having to write about a lot of different subjects. And it's like, there's certainly like a cynical side to it. And then there's like an overworked side to it where it's like, wow, some guy just sent me basically a whole brief that I can produce as an article without having to do any kind of real work or even call many sources because they're already all right here, all the quotes. It really plays a big role, and a lot of progressives in this country, understandably, because it's important. But they really focus on, money and politics in the sense of like who's getting campaign contributions. But the entire nexus of think tanks it plays a much larger role than I think a lot of people who are sort of outside of that sphere recognize.
Yeah, and you see that certainly in issues like Mexico, because as you say, reporters are overworked, they're corporations, right? They're being forced to churn out articles. Budget cutbacks in the newsrooms. They don't want to send a correspondent down to Mexico. A lot of times they don't care that much about Mexico. So it's very easy to just plug in to this information that's right there from the think tanks. And the think tanks know that. Tanks know that. They're basically filling in the void that's being, left by the lack of news and investigative journalism in the U.S. And it has very insidious results in this kind of case because you wind up getting an absolutely skewed narrative that has nothing to do with what's actually going on the ground down here.
Well, I know, we don't have to sit here and make too many predictions, but going into this fight, how is it looking? The possibility of AMLO winning out on this?
Well, here's the story. The situation is fluid. AMLO needs to get a 2/3 majority in both houses of Congress because it's a constitutional level reform, which is difficult because he's going to have to get opposition votes. Morena has a majority, but it doesn't, and its allies, but it doesn't have a 2/3 majority. And there's actually been kind of a sense over the last few days that the opposition is so upset that the recall went well, and they got a bloody nose from it, that they're now determined to make sure that Morena loses in something. Whatever it is, they want to make sure Morena loses in something. So it's very possible that the electricity reform, the votes on Sunday, may not pass. But AMLO, ever the strategist, right, the chess player, said, if it doesn't pass, then very next day, I'm sending an amendment to the mining law to make sure that lithium is nationalized. Now, it won't be constitutional level, but it'll still be a law, right? So he's kind of looking past that. He also got a good ruling from the Supreme Court a week or so ago, which says his original energy law is constitutional because many people thought they were going to rule it unconstitutional. So he proposed the constitutional reform because it locks it in more, but also with the concern that maybe the Supreme Court would take his law and call it unconstitutional. That law was ruled constitutional. So between that and the reform to the mining law, it would do most of what he wanted to do with the constitutional reforms. Anyway, now, they're going all out to make sure it passes on Sunday. But if it doesn't, you always have to have a plan B. And the plan B, we're taking the mining law and we're going to make sure that the lithium is the property of the nation in that.
Oh, that's huge. Well, Kurt, I really appreciate you spending some time with us this evening. We'll definitely have to have you back on to do some more New York Times debunking. That was a hell of a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's always fun because it's like shooting fish in a barrel, isn't it?
Well, everyone can find Kurt's work in Jacobin magazine. We'll also have links for other ways that you can follow. And please take care, friend.
Okay. Take care, guys. Thanks.
Be around.
Take care.
Bye.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Kurt's got a good section in the Jacobin piece. In Mexico, AMLO's opponents are resorting to smear campaigns on the media cast.
Oh, yeah.
And the revelation of somebody's salary and how that's putting everybody on edge, that is worth checking out. Very eye-opening how their media works down there.
Oh, for sure. And the house, I think, was in Houston. That everyone was getting worked up about. I will just say we're going to go to this last segment before we go to the post game, but I just want to note, and maybe I'm just really obsessed over this, but I do think that this fight over energy is so important. It's important here in Texas. It's important in whatever community that you're living in, and it's certainly important in Mexico. And I talked yesterday. I let you know this, Matt, but I revisited one of our old segments at the beginning of the pandemic with Michael, and we were sort of talking about like what might happen out of this COVID thing. And, there was a lot of hope that maybe people would see some of the, curvature of neoliberalism and, something would happen. And, that's certainly not the case. There is not going to be any kind of non-political event that sort of shifts and shakes up this system. So living in that kind of paradigm that, certainly like re-cemented itself through Biden and a lot of the kind of more centrist resurgence that we've seen since the beginning of this pandemic. We need to start looking at what are the big fights going to be over this next decade. And there is no doubt about it that it's not just climate change, like in the abstract. It's going to be about who controls energy. And you're seeing this, and this is where it gets really nasty with, liberals like Kerry and Salazar and the Biden administration basically trying to push back against an initiative in Mexico, despite people thinking of, John Kerry, for example, as this great, green warrior. This is what this next chapter of this fight is going to be. And I don't have, the answer other than winning, and building political power. But this is something that needs to be on your radar. It's in sort of, recognizing the fact that they are already trying to set the stage for like this next generation of energy production. They're trying to do it in a way that maintains corporate power above all else. And, it's time to get really smart about this shit. Because, they're working overtime. And I worry sometimes that we aren't as much as we should be.